know it sounds impossible, but yes, I went 23 years without reading or watching the epic that is The Lord of the Rings. And you're asking, what causes you to do that after all these years? And honestly, it's just I wanted to. I was sitting around and I've been reading a lot lately. That was one of my 2025 ends, was that I wanted to read more. I had read one of the pocket fantasy books that I'd gotten from Second and Charles. It was like $1. I really enjoyed it, and I was thinking, what are other stories that I'd want to read like that? And I thought, well, I really enjoyed The Hobbit when I was in 6th grade. I read that. That was my first introduction to Middle-earth. We watched the 1974 animated movie, but I really just wanted to explore, the first one, because that's probably a great place to start. And I had also come into possession of a Kindle, which I figured was a good time to try, a Kindle and read The Lord of the Rings on it. That could be the book that I read on it, which I would love to talk about another time. Growing up, I felt like you fell into one of 3 categories, and that was like The Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, and Percy Jackson. And to me, those were like gangs. Like, you couldn't like more of them, mainly because none of my friends did. And I was a devout Harry Potter kid. And I also really can't understand where I chose never to revisit it after all those years, because I really enjoyed The Hobbit and I enjoyed Middle-earth. I can only assume that when I was, what would I have been, 12, 13, I was like, I don't want to read those. And then I let that drive my mind up until I was 23 for some reason. But yeah, I thought it'd be cool to document my time reading the books alongside watching the movie. So I planned for this to kind of be a 3-part series covering each book and each movie. So yeah, I finished the book and then I watched the movie, and I gotta say, I loved it. It was good. I think in this experience, one of the things that I valued most was the fact that I never grew up with it, so I never indulged in it, so I never knew anything about it. So it was fun to almost experience what I'm sure people experienced in 2001, which was like seeing these castings come out and watch the movie and see the story play out in the way you imagined it, which is something that I got to simulate in this experience. So let's start with the book. My time reading this book was kind of a big roller coaster. There was times that I was really, really interested in it, and there was other times that it felt almost like pulling teeth. I understand readers saying if you don't like a book, don't read it, but I was really hell-bent on at least finishing it so that if I had any critiques, they weren't hollow. The overall structure is great. It's a good read. It's very, very interesting, and J.R.R. Tolkien is a very, very phenomenal writer, which I think is also his downside. When Frodo and the gang get to Rivendell, at that point I was really, really into the book. I was really into it. I was having a lot of fun with it. I loved the characters, I loved the relationships, and I loved the story and the way it was flowing. The combat scenes were really good, and the lore around Middle-earth that was building, especially since I had already read The Hobbit, was very, very intriguing. I believe it was probably the next 15 to 20% of the book that was some of the most boring world building I've ever experienced. There was so much lore, and I was on a bus ride for about 6 hours, and I tackled it, and it sucked. It sucked because I just couldn't stay into it. There were so many name drops of so many cities and so many characters and so many stories and so many things that typically in the way that you read books is that you'll have a character or a city or a town reference and you're like, oh, this is going to come up later, I need to remember this. But at the amount of things that were being dropped in front of me, I wasn't sure what needed to be remembered and what didn't. It was very overwhelming. I would say that's probably the best way to word it, is that I was very overwhelmed with the lore of Middle-earth, and I honestly just didn't care. And maybe I'm an idiot, and maybe there's somebody way smarter than me out there saying, I understood all of it, I don't understand what this guy's talking about. I really would be surprised to find out that's the case, but if you are one of those people, please let me know. I definitely thought about dropping it at this point because, like I said, I was pretty confused on what I was supposed to remember and what I wasn't. I would like to stress this too. For the length of the book being about 398 pages, and choose my words carefully, nothing happens. Nothing really happens. It's a very light fantasy thing. The first part of the book is very interesting, and I really enjoyed the world building. I thought it was cool, as though it wasn't very engaging, but I respected the level of writing, and I really enjoyed that level of writing. It was very beautiful. But the second half of the book, when you get into book 2, is pretty much just lore, meet elves, go through mountain. And maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but if that's all I remember, I'm going to try to go with my gut here. However, I'm willing to make an excuse for this book nothing happening for time. I think it's just time. When you grow up, if I was a 17-year-old in 1954, I would have wanted to know everything about this whole world. I would have wanted to know everything, because obviously nothing like this had really been done at this level before, and every part of fantasy genre pulls from The Lord of the Rings, obviously. It's one of the first major fantasy stories. However, that doesn't mean that other people don't do it better. When you grow up like how I have, where you're completely enveloped in, Skyrim and Dungeons and Dragons with your friends, and, Magic the Gathering, the lore around that even was pretty interesting, and these worlds that are fantasy driven, it's definitely hard for Lord of the Rings to hold up a light to it, and for me, the story feels a little hollow. Sir Isaac Newton once quoted saying that if I've seen further, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants, and I think that all of these franchises are standing on the shoulder of the giant that is the Lord of the Rings. But I think it's one of those things where I had to walk so others could run. After finishing the book, I gave it about a day to marinate to see how I felt about it, and I did enjoy it. I think I rated it 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads, and my only complaint was that like 15 to 20% of the book that was lore of them hanging out in Rivendell, just a little boring, not super needed, and then I decided to watch the trailer for the movie. That was so much fun. I haven't had the luxury of growing up in my lifetime of reading a book and then watching a movie a whole lot, none that I can remember off the top of my head. So being able to watch that and see the castings was crazy. I wasn't completely dumb. I understood that Ian McKellen was Gandalf, and I knew that Elijah Wood was Frodo. And that's where it stops. I didn't know anybody else, and it's just so cool to watch the trailer to be like, oh, that's Legolas, oh, that's Aragorn, oh, that's Samwise. Side note, Sean Astin is Samwise. Oh my god. It was also pretty fun to watch portions of the movie that later become memes, like Boromir's One Does Not Simply, and even the Claw, it was very cool to watch those. I felt kind of dumb, and I feel like it took the intensity out of the scene for that, but it was cute. I had a great time watching it. I watched it with one of my buddies who had never seen the movies, and he didn't read the book, but he had a good time watching it. I was a little sad to see Tom Bombadil cut from it, but if you're shortening a 10 to 12 hour read down to 3 hours, totally see why it's cut, which is another reason that I felt like Rivendell was shortened as much as it was. I was extremely surprised to see how well the CGI held up after 24 years. By the way, 24 years. The same gap of 24 years with The Lord of the Rings is 1977, when Star Wars A New Hope came out. I was very impressed with CGI and the set design for this, because it was very cool to see it exactly how I imagined it on screen. The prancing pony, the journey into Moria, even Bilbo's 111th birthday party, all exactly how I imagined it. So it was very cool to see it executed in that way. I will say, as I said previously, that the movie gave me more of an incentive to finish the books, because I feel like I have a stronger idea of the characters and how they look, and the imagination process of reading and seeing how these things would play out. And it made me want to watch the second movie, but I know that I told myself I'd read the second book, so I'm going to do that. I'm currently at about 70% of the book that I'm reading right now. I'm taking a break in between each one to kind of decompress from it. Right now I'm reading Between Two Fires by Christopher Buhlman. I'm about 70% of the way through that, so it should end sometime this week, and I'll pick up The Two Towers. So I'm looking forward to being able to share that with y'all too. I'm excited to continue this journey through Middle-earth, and I hope y'all can share some insight and share your opinions and let me know if it'll pick up or not so much. Have a good night, guys.